Have you ever started a project on your house and instantly wondered, what have I gotten myself into? Well, I did, and it's these stupid floors. My name is John. Welcome to my money pit. In order to properly tell the story of refinishing these floors, I have to start off by talking about the condition they're in. The first problem is they've got a ton of finish that has to come off. When I removed the island and exposed the floors underneath, I saw all the different layers that have been added over the years. It looked like they stained the floors with a color that had a lot of orange and red in it, but it was on the lighter side, and of course they covered that with what was most likely polyurethane. But then it looked like someone didn't like the color, and rather than sanding the floors down and refinishing them like I'm doing, they just added a tinted polyurethane on top. They most likely used a product like Minwax Polyshades to do this, but it wasn't dark enough, so they got a darker one and did it again. And again. I swear it looks like there's 5 or 6 layers of finish on these floors. Polyurethane is super tough and hard enough to remove to begin with, but when it's a ½ inch thick, forget about it. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this is super thick, and it's not the only problem. Oh no, we're just getting started. The next problem is there's severe water damage from the sink backing up and flooding all over the floors, and a plumbing leak that was under the floors shooting up like a geyser into the wood. Obviously wood and water don't mix, so this caused a bunch of the individual floorboards to develop a cup, which means the center of the board is raised up like a little speed bump. All these speed bumps are going to need to be sanded down flat, and that brings me to the last problem. This is heart pine. Now you might hear pine and think, well, that's super soft wood, and in most cases you'd be right, but number 2 southern yellow pine you can grab at Lowe's and heart pine are very different. Heart pine, well, it's basically like sanding stainless steel. All right, now that you know what's going on, let me tell you about what's quite possibly the worst experience of my life. Obviously, I don't have a drum sander sitting in my shed, so I had to rent one, and this is where I had my first problem. I went to my local Sunbelt Rentals and reserved one of the drum sanders that has that drum on it that you just slide the paper on and the friction of the drum holds it in place. Well, when I showed up to pick it up, they didn't have the paper for that style sander, so the guy was like, it's no big deal. We'll just give you this other style where you have to fold the paper, wrap it around, and use a wrench to tighten it all on. It was either I take this one or I don't get one at all. So I took it. And let me say, I hated this machine. Did it work? Yeah, but changing the paper was a huge hassle, and because it has the seam in the paper, it creates a weak spot that would cause the paper to just spontaneously explode. It was a huge pain, but other than that, it got the job done. As you're watching this footage of me using this machine, you're not really getting the whole picture of what this experience was like. I already told you about the issues with the floor, and when you add to it the fact that I had to pick up on the machine to get any kind of pressure on the surface, this thing practically destroyed me. Add to that the fact that the machine was about 3 inches shorter than it needed to be for me to be comfortable, which meant I spent like 20 hours hunched over just a little bit. You end up with a guy that at the end of this was nearly dead. Okay, I'm exaggerating again, but I'm also not. I already had a bad back, and this thing completely wrecked me. And as you're watching this, you're probably thinking, wow, he must have used some super dull paper to have to go over it so many times. And you'd be wrong. I had to go over it that much to get things flat. You notice how when I start on a new board, it just sands a little strip down the middle? Well, that's that cupping I was talking about. I had to keep going back and forth like 100 times on some of these to get them flat and remove all the finish. And no, for the first time in this video, I'm not exaggerating. Now let's move on to the next completely useless piece of equipment I rented from Sunbelt Rentals. The edger. First of all, I reserved one that had the offset disc on it for getting underneath toe kicks, but of course they didn't have that one, so I ended up with this total piece of shit. The problem with this thing was the bolt that would hold on the disc wouldn't tighten all the way, so after about a foot of sanding, the disc would just break apart into a million pieces. After going through like 10 discs, throwing all kinds of curse words, and giving the finger to this piece of junk, I put it outside and grabbed my little 6-inch DeWalt orbital sander to finish the edges. Also, thank God for my wife. She volunteered to help me sand the edges, and she's like me. If she's going to do a job, she likes to get the hardest part done first. That way the job gets easier and easier as you go. But I don't think she really knew what she was getting into. You think it was hard to get good results with that 125-pound drum sander? Try sanding with this little profile sander and a scraper. She had to do it that way, unfortunately, because it's all that would fit under the toe kicks. I ended up using the same technique on the 2 tiny toe kicks in the desk area, and I gotta say, I have no idea how she made it through that long toe kick. Now, what can I say? I married a badass. Now, you might be asking, why didn't I just take the edger back and save myself a bunch of time? Well, this is where there's a technicality with a company like Sunbelt that I exploited, but it also screwed me in the end. See, big companies like Sunbelt and United Rentals aren't open on the weekends. So if you rent a machine on a Friday with a return date of Monday, you're only charged for those 2 days since they're closed and you don't even have the option to return them on the weekend. This is the main reason I went there as opposed to Lowe's or Home Depot. Well, the downside to that is if you're working on your project on the weekend and there's a problem, there's nothing you can do. If you want to get the job done, you just got to figure it out. Now, to close out this rant about Sunbelt, I do need to give them credit. When I took the machines back and told them what was going on with the edger, they not only refunded me for the rental of that machine, but they also refunded me for all the discs and about half of the drum sander paper. Yeah, the machines sucked and I hated every second I spent using them, but credit where credit's due. Sunbelt took care of me. I'll go back if I need to rent something else. Okay, now that I've blown your ears up with a bunch of complaining, let me explain the whole process. I started off with 36 grit paper on the drum sander to get everything flat and remove the color. Once that was done, or close enough, I switched to 60 grit and went through the whole room again. This was significantly less miserable though, because I wasn't flattening anything. I was just going over it to smooth it out more. Once I went through the whole room with 60 grit, I switched to 80 grit and did it all again. Then 100 grit and went over it for the final time. I also did the same process on all of the edges with my little DeWalt sander. In past videos, you've heard me say, I won't compromise. If something isn't right, I'm going to keep going till it is, but I just got done saying this is close enough. Have I lowered my standards just because this was a difficult job? Well, yes, but also no. The thing is, these floors were never going to be perfect. It's just not possible. Plus, my wife and I really like the kind of rustic look on the floors. It's not as rustic as they were when I started, but we like them to have a little character. And this job really sucked, and I just wanted it to be over. With the floor sanded good enough, it was finally time to get started on the fun part, the finishing. I don't know why, but I really enjoy this part of any woodworking project. It's probably because I spent so many years as an antique restorer, but this is where things dramatically change really fast, and I love it. Well, except for the being down on my knees part. I'm too old for this shit. To start the finishing process, my wife and I applied wood conditioner. The product we used is called Pre-Stain from Minwax. And before you hardcore fancy woodworkers ridicule me for using Minwax products, please just take a second and consider something. These are my floors, not yours. And I didn't ask how you feel about Minwax. Wood conditioner basically makes it so that the stain doesn't soak as deep into the wood, making it more even. This isn't required with most woods, but it's a must with pine. Unless you want the job to turn out all blotchy and gross. My wife went through with a foam brush and applied the conditioner, and I came behind her and wiped it down to remove the excess. Once the entire floors were coated with the conditioner, we went right into the stain. The manufacturer actually recommends that you apply the stain within 2 hours of applying the conditioner. For the stain, we used Early American from Minwax. Again with the Minwax thing. I originally thought of just applying a top coat on without any stain, but I did that on a little test area and my wife and I both looked at it and we were like, no, I don't know. It just didn't look good. We used the same process with my wife applying the stain with a foam brush and me coming behind her to wipe it down. This went really smooth, and I just gotta say, if it hadn't been for my wife helping me on this, I don't know if I'd have made it through. She volunteered to help me with this, and when we were about halfway through with the conditioner, I said, "You really regret volunteering for this, don't you?" She said, "No, it's fun." I love that woman. I let the stain dry overnight and the next day got started with the top coats. For this, I used a product I've never used before, which is Bona Traffic Go. I can hear it now. If there's any dudes under the age of 25 watching this, they're saying, Bona. I've got a 21-year-old. I know how this works. As I said, I've never used this product before, so I was a little nervous, but it was as easy to apply as putting paint on walls. Bona has a really cool YouTube channel with all kinds of instructional videos, so I watched a few, which, instantly made me an expert on the topic, and I got to work. It goes down super easy. You just pour a line of it down and spread it with a microfiber roller. Once you've got a section done, you put the next line over the already coated area and repeat the process over and over and over again. I came up with a strategy, which I recommend you doing too, where I worked certain areas and worked my way out of the room. I let it dry for about 4 hours and checked it, and well, just like any finishing project, the first coat is not great. It's still pretty rough and you can see the lines between sections, but I knew this would go away with another coat. I tried sanding the area with a burgundy sanding pad, but to be honest, that really wasn't doing anything, so I switched to 220 grit sandpaper. I know, I was afraid this would be a little too aggressive too, but I tested it in an area that was kind of hidden, and it was fine. With that first coat sanded with 220 grit paper, I swept the room really good, then went through with my shop vac, and finally, just before applying the second coat, I went through with a tack cloth to pick up anything left behind. The second coat went on like a dream, and I couldn't be happier with the results. I'd highly recommend this Bona Traffic Go. I'll have links in the description if you want to try this out. It's not cheap. I paid over $350 for this finish, but I can tell you with all honesty, it's worth every penny. With everything dry, I went through and installed new baseboards, which I didn't really film, and after about a week, we started bringing furniture back in. And this room really started coming together. Am I absolutely delighted with the finished product? Well, no, but I'm really happy with it. Why am I not delighted? Well, the floor still has its flaws. It's far from perfect. There's a few areas where I could have definitely sanded a little better, and there's chatter marks all over the place from the drum sander, but hey, it's done, and I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. Now, before I end this, I want to say a few things that are really important. First is I have a whole new respect for people that do this kind of work for a living. I can't even imagine having to do this every day and not end up wanting to jump off a bridge. You will never hear me say floor companies charge too much to refinish floors. Those dudes earn every penny they make. And lastly, don't let my experience with these floors sway you away from trying a project like this yourself. If you have oak, maple, or cherry floors like most people do, it'll probably be a breeze for you. I had all the possible worst case scenarios in this project, and that's what made it super hard for me. I'm sure yours will be way easier. But for me, I'm seriously considering just using the existing floors in the rest of my house as a subfloor and covering those sumbitches up with new wood rather than refinish them. It was the worst. I never want to do this again. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for sharing this miserable experience with me, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.